Okay, so hey, what's up everyone? And today I'm going to be going over a tutorial on how to do a draggable div in HTML and CSS. I'm going to show you a quick example of what I mean. I have an HTML page with a div that I can click on the header and just drag and drop around the page. So I'll be going over a step-by-step tutorial on how to do this. If you find it interesting, stick around. Okay, so first thing we're gonna need as usual is an index.html file. And I'm gonna go ahead and type !enter to have VS Code fill in the boilerplate code. So now that we have our doc type HTML head, metadata, etc., we can go ahead and start making the div that's gonna be drag and droppable. So I'll create a div with an ID of movable div. Inside the movable div, I'm going to be creating another div that's going to be the header of the movable div. So another div with an ID of movable div header this time. And I'm going to be typing some text inside of it, like movable div header. I'll save and preview with live server. Okay, and then I'm gonna be creating some content inside of the div, like 3 paragraphs, for example. So I'll go ahead and create 3 paragraphs and type any random text inside of them, like drag and drop to move this div. Okay, so let's start styling our div. I'll create a style section at the top, target the movable div by targeting its ID, movable. And then I'll give it a background color. And then I'm gonna make it a little bit lighter because this is not so easy on the eyes. Okay, and then I'm gonna give it a width of 200 pixels, for example. And then I'm gonna be centering all the text align center. Okay, next thing I wanna change the color of the header so that it's obvious that it's a header of the div. So I'll target the movable div header, do a background color of a darker blue, for example. I'll give it some vertical padding because at the moment there's no breathing room in there. So padding 1 rem and 0 on the horizontal axis. Okay, and then I'm gonna also be giving the movable div some padding on the bottom. Okay, now I just want to change the font of the text that's inside the div, so I'll go for an Arial, and I'll change the color of the text that's inside the movable div header to white. And I'm also gonna be adding font weight, so I'll be making it bold. I'm going a bit for the classic Windows look, like Windows 3.1, I think it was, kind of looked like this a little bit. I'm also going to be adding some box shadow to the movable div. 2 pixel, 2 pixel, 2 pixel gray. Okay, so here we have our div, and now we're going to start working on the JavaScript portion of the tutorial, which is going to allow me to drag and drop the div around the screen. Okay, so I'll start creating a script section at the bottom of the document, and that's going to be where I'm going to be typing my JavaScript code. And first thing I want to do in my JavaScript code is have some sort of mechanism that will tell me when I'm clicking on the movable div header and holding down the mouse button, and then when I'm releasing it. So we have 2 useful events in JavaScript. One tells me when I first click the mouse button, and another event that tells me when I'm releasing the mouse button. Unluckily, there's no event to tell me that I'm holding down the mouse button. So I'll have to create a variable that I'm gonna be calling isClicked that will get set to true when I first click on the div header, and then it will get set to false when I release the mouse button, so that I can check that variable, and when the variable is set to true, I know that I'm holding down the mouse button. Let's start doing that. First of all, I'll do a let isClicked, and this is going to be the variable that's going to be set to false at the beginning. Then it's going to be switched to true when I click the mouse button, And as long as I'm holding it, it's gonna keep a value of true, and then it's gonna be switched back to false when I release the mouse button. Of course, this is only gonna happen if I start the click on the movable div header. Like I want this isClicked variable to only be switched to true if I'm actually clicking on the movable div header. So I want to know when I'm holding down the mouse button and the mouse button has been started, or the click has been started on the movable div header. So I'll get a reference to the movable div header, like constant movable div header. In this variable, I'm gonna be putting a reference to the movable div header, document.querySelector, and select the movable div header with its ID. Okay, so when the script runs in movable div header, I should have a reference to the movable div header. And then I'm gonna be placing an event listener on the movable div header that tells me when I click the mouse button. So movable div header dot add event listener. And the event that gets fired when you click on the mouse button is mouse down. And then next to it, I'm gonna be typing the name of a function that gets called when this event is fired. So on mouse down, that's what I'm gonna be calling the function. Okay, and then we have to define the function. So I'm gonna be going for function on mouse down, and then it's gonna receive the event that gets fired when you actually do the mouse down. And then inside on mouse down, I'm gonna be switching the variable isClicked to true. I'm also gonna be typing some message, which I'm gonna be logging in my console just to know that the function is actually working. So I'll do like a log movable div header has been clicked. Movable div header has been clicked. Okay, so next thing I want to do is add an event listener that will tell me that I released the mouse button. But this time I'm not going to be adding the event just to the movable div header, because I want this listener to listen when the mouse button gets released in every part of the document. I don't have to be hovering over the movable div header when I release the mouse button. So I'll be adding like a document.add event listener. And that event listener is going to be listening to mouse up, and it's going to be firing a function on mouse up. I'll go ahead and define that function on mouse up. It's also going to be receiving an event, and it's going to be switching the isClicked variable back to false. So isClicked equals false. And it's going to be logging some message to the console just to alert me that the mouse button has been released. Mouse button released. So let's see if this is working correctly. I'll be opening the DevTools in my browser, and I'm gonna click on the movable div header and hold the click. And at the moment I'm holding the click, and then I'll release the click right now, and it's gonna be logging first of all the first message. So movable div header has been clicked, and when I released, it said mouse button released. Now let's see what happens if I click somewhere random on the document, which is not the movable div header. It will not fire the event. On mouse down only gets triggered if I'm starting the click on the mouse div header, and then I can move anywhere and release, and it's gonna fire the on mouse up. I also want to have another mechanism that tells me when I'm moving the mouse all over my document here, so that I can then move the div according to my mouse movement. So first thing I'm gonna be needing here is an event listener that listens anywhere in the document when I'm moving my mouse, and fires a function whenever I move my mouse. I'll do like a document.add event listener, and it's gonna be listening to the event mouse move, and it's gonna be firing a function called on mouse move. I'll go down here and define the function, and it's gonna be receiving an event as usual. And the event in here that I'm receiving will contain a property that's called movement X and movement Y. And these two properties pretty much tell me by how much did my mouse move since the last time this event has been fired. And by changing the coordinates of the movable div by an amount equal to the movement X and movement Y, it will result in me being able to move the mouse and have the div move according to my mouse movements. But in order to do this, I first need to give the movable div a position of absolute, so that I can then move it by changing the top and left coordinates. So let's start by doing that. I'll go to the movable div and give it a position of absolute. And then down here in my function, I'm gonna be creating two variables that are gonna contain the current coordinates of the movable div. So before I start moving it, for example, I'll have like a coords X, and then I'll have a coords Y. And in here, I wanna have the top and left value of my movable div to which I'm going to be adding or removing as I move my mouse. So let's go ahead and do that. Let chords y and chords x. And then to get the current chords of the div, I'm going to be using a function that's called getComputedStyle of the element of which I want to get the styles of. So I need a reference to the element first of all. So I'll get a reference to the movable div. I'm going to be making a variable that contains the reference to the movable div. Do a document.query selector and select it using its ID, movable div. And then down here in my function on the x coordinates, I'll do like a window dot get computed style of the element movable div. And the computed style that I want to get is going to be for the x, it's going to be the left property. And for the y, it's going to be the top property. So when this runs, when on mouse move runs, the first thing I'm gonna have inside my two variables over here are the left property inside the chords x and the top property inside the chords y. Let's see if it works as expected. So I'll log to console chords x and chords y. So as you can see here in my console, when I move the mouse, it's logging the top and left coordinates of my div. It's 8 pixel and 8 pixel, and this is probably because we have a margin, like the body of the document has a margin. So next thing I want to do is modify these top and left properties by an amount equal to the movement of my mouse. So let's first of all start detecting the movement of my mouse. So I'll create two other variables that I'll call movement x, and that's gonna be the event dot movement x, and then I'll create a movement y. Then I'm gonna be logging these two things to screen. So as you can see, there's two coordinates. There's like a -1 or a +1, and this is pretty much the movement of the mouse since last time the function has been called. So now what I need to do is get the x coordinates and then add the movement x to it and assign the new value that I will get as a result to the styles of the movable div. And this will cause the movable div to move along with my mouse. So let's start doing that. I'll create another variable that's called new x, for example. And the new x will be the chords x plus movement x. And then I'll create another variable that's called the new y, which is going to be the chords of y plus the movement of y. And then I'm going to be assigning the new x and the new y to the top and left properties of the movable div. So I'll do that, movable div dot style dot top, for example, equals new y. And again, movable div dot style dot left this time equals new x. Okay, but there's just one little thing that I forgot here, that the chords x and the chords y will be passed in a string format. So for me to be able to do an addition with a string, I first need to convert the chords x and the chords y to an integer. Because at the moment what I'm receiving here is 8 pixel and 8 pixel, and 8 pixel is a string actually, so it's not a number. So for me to be able to do addition with movement x, which is a number, as you can see, for example, I need to first of all convert the chords x to a number and then be able to add it to the movement x, which is also a number itself. So let's start by doing a parse int, and this is a function, a built-in function in JavaScript that converts a string to a number. So if I do parse int on the chords x and the chords y, let's first of all start logging to screen what happens. So I'll comment this out for now. And in my log here, instead of logging the raw chords x, I'll be logging the parse int chords x and parse int chords y and see what happens. Okay, so as you can see now, I'm receiving two numbers. Now I can actually do an arithmetic operation and add them to my new variable of new x and new y. Okay, and then I want to assign the new x and new y to the movable div top and left properties. So I'll go ahead and do movable div dot style dot top and give it the new y equals new y. And then same thing for the new X, but I'm gonna be assigning it to the left property this time. So let's see what happens. Okay, so I realized it's not working, and I quickly went ahead and debugged, and I realized that I need to, after I converted the coords X and movement X here, in order to be able to do an arithmetic operation, the new X and new Y are in the form of integers. So I need to convert them back in the form of a string. So in order for this to work, I need the new X and new Y to have the string px at the end. And when I do like plus px like this will convert the whole thing to a string, and then I can assign it to my styles. So I'll save now, and whenever I move my mouse inside the window, the movable div is moving along with it. Now the last thing I need to do is combine the two mechanisms that I created. The mechanism that detects the mouse click and the mouse release, and the movement of the mouse, in one function that will only move the div when I'm holding down the mouse. So if I add an if statement here at the top of the onMouseMove and check for the variable isClicked, it should do exactly that. So I'll go ahead and try it out. If isClicked, which means if isClicked is true. So if I started clicking on the movable div header and I still didn't release, I want all of this stuff that I typed in here to happen. Otherwise, don't do anything. So now when I move my mouse anywhere on the screen, nothing happens. But when I hold down the mouse on the movable div header, I am finally able to move my div with the drag and drop mechanism. Yeah, so pretty much that's it. And I know it got a little bit confusing halfway through, so I'll quickly summarize what we did. Is a variable that gets set to true when I click on the div header, and then gets set to false when I release the mouse button anywhere in the screen. And then I made a function that will move my div by changing its coordinates along with my mouse movements. And then I combined the two things in one function that will only move the div header when I'm holding down the mouse button, and will stop moving it when I release the mouse button. Yeah, so that's it, and I hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial, and I'll see you later.